Stereotypes that you and I should know all too well. The book The Other Westmore, One Name, Two Fates, is an amazing story about how two people so similar ended up in such different positions in life. Throughout the story, there were many stereotypes that were evident. The ones that stood out to me, in particular, were ones that pertained to race, age, and financial position. The time frame that the story was set in is quite a different time from today when it comes to racial acceptance in our culture. Even though this issue has gotten much better over time, I believe it is still important to talk about these kinds of stereotypes that pop up once in a while. Most people are probably Most people probably do not even think of what it is like to be stereotyped based solely upon race. Being of Asian descent, I have experienced plenty of my own stereotypes over the years. Age is another large factor in all this stereotyping, kids and teens in particular. These stereotypes are things that I believe everyone should be more aware and considerate of. Ultimately, the stereotypes that pertain to race, age, and financial position are difficult to understand and sympathize with unless you have experienced them firsthand, such as I have. Stereotypes of people of color and different ethnicity can range from being highly offensive to just joking around with friends. Something I have learned over all these years is that there are plenty of stereotypes for Asians. Some of the most known ones are that Asians are automatically good at math, and everyone that is also Asian must be related to you. These are not usually intended to be highly offensive, though. To counter these types of stereotypes, you should not get angry and hostile with a person. Remember, you should just play along with the joke and just be open-minded about it. Certain stereotypes, however, come off as fairly offensive to me. One of these includes the whole stereotype of Asians not being able to see because of their eyes. I have always taken this as an offensive and jerky comment rather than a joke. I believe that it is important for people to be able to differentiate between the line of offensive versus comical stereotyping. In this story, there are a couple times that people are stereotyped in a negative way because of the color of their skin. There's one part in the story that is an example of this stereotyping. Moore writes, "My father had entered the hospital seeking help, but his face was unshaven, his clothes disheveled, his name unfamiliar, his address not in an affluent area. The hospital looked at him askance, insulted him with ridiculous questions, and basically told him to go fend for himself." Even though this does not directly say that he was rejected from the hospital because of race, it is implied in context clues. The people at the hospital seemed to stereotype him as a non-intelligent man of color that was just a impoverished bum. I do not think that they would have treated a white person in the same way. Because of this harsh stereotype and the hospital not helping him, he died from a lack of treatment. This is very unfortunate that something that could have been prevented was not. Stereotyping in the story was also shown on the other side at times too. At one point, Moore writes about his first thoughts on military school. He writes, and what was military school anyway? A bunch of countrified folks yelling and screaming, waving flags and chewing tobacco, forcing confused kids to crawl through mud, preparing them to get killed at war. With this, he stereotypes these people at military school as a bunch of mindless country redneck folks. This is an example that proves that stereotypes are not just limited to people of color. Another example of this is when Moore writes, "Lame, I know, but I was desperate. Most of my neighborhood friends were attending public schools in the area. A few were attending Catholic school, but Justin and I were the only two who actually went all the way across town to attend a predominantly white private school." It is interesting that Moore does not want people he knows from the hood to know which school he goes to because of this predominantly white school. There are plenty of other stereotypes like these ones. They are just less common and not acknowledged as much because whites are not the minority. There were also other stereotypes in the book that did not have to do with race. Many times in the story, Moore and Wes were stereotyped as reckless teenagers that were up to no good. This is yet another stereotype that I have dealt with many times. It is the whole idea that teenagers cannot be trusted and are bound to break something or cause trouble. Although this may be true for some kids and teens, it does not mean it should apply to all. Moore experiences this in the book at one point while he is caught tagging. He writes, "The cop shook his head and pointed his right index finger in our direction. You kids are way too young to be in this situation, but you know what? I see kids like you here every day. If you don't get smart, I am certain I'll see you again. That's the sad part. When the cop says that to Moore and his friend, when the cop says that Moore and his friend are like kids that he sees every day, he automatically makes the assumption that he will see them again. The cop stereotypes Moore as a young and probably uneducated child that will probably end up in jail. I believe that everyone at some point in their life has been stereotyped or stereotyped someone based on how old they were. The story also had many stereotypes that pertain to people's financial positions. Things such as stereotyping poor and less privileged family and kids. It also at times contained stereotypes of privileged and more wealthy kids. Moore writes, the check cashing stores instead of banks, the rows of beauty salons, liquor stores, laundromats, funeral homes, and their graffiti-laced walls were the universal streetscape of poverty. Both Wes and Moore grew up in these type of areas, which were considered impoverished and broken down. Although I did not grow up in these kind of circumstances, I know a few people that have. It is interesting just how different these settings are from where I live. The stereotypes for people that live in more privileged and wealthy areas are that they are stuck up and snobby. This is something I know from personal experience because some people believe that I live in a neighborhood like that. The time that the story was written in was quite different from today. Certain stereotypes that were probably considered very offensive then might not be as offensive today. On the other side of it, lots of stereotypes made back then are much more offensive today. Stereotyping involves a lot of judging without information or knowledge behind them. People assume certain things without even knowing the person. The stereotypes that have to do with one's age, race, or financial position are misunderstood and judgmental. It is kind of like how someone of the opposite gender can never completely understand what it is like to be stereotyped as the other. The same goes with stereotypes for people of different races. It is almost arrogant for someone that is white to say that they can completely understand what it feels like to be discriminated against and stereotyped as a person of color. Something everyone should think about is the type of stereotypes that you may have personally experienced, thinking mainly about how they made you feel. Sometimes stereotypes can be hurtful to someone without intending to be. I think that we should all be more careful when judging and assuming things about someone.